So joining me today on our first TaaS Talks 2 is James Carter from Vision Mobility. Good afternoon, James, or good morning over there, I suppose.
Yes, it is. Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. So James, can we start by you telling us a little bit about yourself and Vision Mobility, please?
Sure, yeah. So my background is I worked for Toyota for nearly 20 years in Australia. I'm Australian by background. I was at Toyota Australia for 9 years, and two of those years I spent in TMC in Japan, working deep in the depths of Toyota in Tokyo. And in 2005, I moved to Canada. My wife is Canadian, and I worked for Toyota Canada for another 10 years. So most of my experience is in sales, operations, being out with dealers, in product planning, strategic planning, all that stuff that goes into, I guess, the operational aspects of OEMs.
Fantastic. And how did you find yourself then moving towards more autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles and that side of the industry?
Yeah, good question. So 3 years ago, actually 3.5 years ago now, I left Toyota and decided that it was time to expand my viewpoint and vision. And after leaving, certainly new mobility was very well aligned with my goals, I guess, as of what I wanted to do and be, and so it naturally became something I became very interested in. I was always interested in product planning. I like cars, and moving on into that new mobility world seemed like the way to go. So with that, I spent a lot of time doing some research, talking to a lot of people, and to build a much knowledge base as I possibly can. And that became very interesting because I started to see that where traditional OEMs were, particularly on a distributor and a dealer level, compared to where the industry was going, they were actually quite disparate. And in fact, a lot of people didn't have any idea what was going on or why change was coming and what they needed to do to be part of that change, or in fact to avoid disruption altogether.
Yeah, fantastic. And as you've moved over, what are the developments and trends and the companies that are making those biggest strides forward, do you think?
So that's a good question, and I think it's worth noting that one of the things that's happened with mobility as we move forward is that there's been this de-siloing effect. So traditionally we've had automotive, we've had transportation or transit, then separately we've had taxis, or everything's been disparate, but now it's been flattened out. So the point being is that this industry is now a massive mega industry. So trying to point to a few companies that are actually doing well is relatively tricky, but I think there are some companies that I've seen that are particularly well ahead in the AV space. Obviously Waymo is certainly a leader. I think one of the things that's very interesting to see is MaaS Global and their WIM product as they put together mobility as a service. That's been very interesting to watch, and perhaps the big one that everyone is talking about, and Tesla's talked about for good reason. They have almost single-handedly recreated what electric vehicles, and I think we have a lot to be thankful to Mr. Musk for really growing that direction and showing the way forward.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly is pushing the boundaries and pushing it all forward, and I imagine his vast investment doesn't harm that fact, and he certainly is leading the way. But what challenges do you think Tesla and other companies will face in the next few years in getting autonomous vehicles out there?
Well, I think when you look at autonomous is, there are so many challenges. Not to say that they can't be overcome, but there are many, many challenges. The complexity of how all these systems work, what they have to look out with, the complexity of how our road systems work, not just within one particular city, which, busy cities, say like Toronto, but if you apply those learnings and take it to London, those learnings then have to be rethought, because not only is it on the other side of the road, the people's way of thinking and way of handling traffic, whether they're pedestrians or cars. The signs are different. There's so much that has to be rethought and reanalyzed, and predictions have to be redone. So the complexity of localizing not just for different countries, but even particular cities is really huge, and I think that's a massive challenge. So that's just one small portion. I think there's other challenges in ethics, trying to figure out what are priorities, in very, very extreme situations, who gets hit and who doesn't. People talk about, things like cost. Right now, full autonomous vehicles are extremely expensive. What's the cost pathway to bring that down to much more reasonable levels? And then there's the legal and regulatory challenges that we face today. What happens if AVs are in an accident? How is blame assigned? There's a whole vast area that's still relatively unexplored there. And I think one of the other big challenges is that the data size and the data transmission between the vehicle and other points is going to be extremely large, very, very high. So, there's discussion that it could be a terabyte per kilometer or per 2 kilometers. And, that's, your laptop hard drive every couple of minutes being transferred out. So, and that sort of data really is very reliant on other technologies such as 5G. So there are so many variables in place for making sure that AV is successful and can cope with the surroundings of today.
Yeah, I think we've still got obviously a long way to go with machine learning and AI, as you say, talking about some of the complexity behind the safety aspects of it, and also learning the roads. And as you said, being a Brit, we drive on the wrong side of the road compared to most of the rest of the world, so there's complexities there. And then obviously, again, 5G is massive in the technology that's going to come through. Working with the data center side of things and making sure that data is processed, analyzed, and works in time with the car on the move. It's a massive scope. So with the industry changing the way it is and all these challenges, do you see it affecting big players? Will there be more startup companies coming into the marketplace with new ideas, fresh impetus? You talked about Tesla earlier. Obviously, they're not new now, but it wasn't that long ago that they were just an idea in Elon Musk's head. So do you think there'll be more startups coming through and making waves in the industry?
Well, I think every time that you see industry disruption or industry change, you see startups coming in and making the most of it. I mean, let's face it, compared to other OEMs, Tesla's still a startup. But not only that, you're seeing this massive growth in startups right across the rest of transportation as well. Companies which is starting to be quite successful now, MaaS Global with WeMap. They were the idea in someone's head, not all that long ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Micro bike share, the ability to operate it from your phone. Those ideas have really grown and grown very quickly. So I think this idea of new technology converging with new social ideas, converging with new platforms is really opening the door for many startups to enter the market, become successful, and grow their business from there. Obviously, established companies such as the big OEMs, do have a successful business. They do have cash on hand that they can use, but really it's up to them to make the right decisions as they move forward and understand that this traditional business of OEMs making vehicles, wholesaling them to dealers, and dealers retailing them to customers is really not one that's going to be sustainable. It's not going to grow anymore. It's only going to decline. And, I think both dealers and OEMs need to recognize that and understand what is the next steps that they need to take place. And for dealers to really think about, well, what changes do we need to do to keep pace with mobility in the future? It's those almost 100-year-old business practices that really need to through if they're going to be competitive in the future.
That's it. And I think when we think about transportation as a service in particular, thoughts tend to go straight away to cars and bigger, large vehicles, whereas really it can be as small as, like you said, bikes and scooters and that could really revolutionise the way we move around cities and urban areas. So I'm really looking forward to that side of things as well. I think that's where it could be really exciting.
Yeah, totally. But it's just the embrace of all this transportation into one big ecosystem. I think that's the real point of where it is moving forward, and making things convenient for customers and much cheaper in a future mobility world.
Yeah. So do you think the current infrastructure is ready for this world? Do you think the road system and everything's out there? I mean, we talked about the challenges earlier of lack of 5G coming in and the amount of data, but do you actually think the actual road infrastructure and pavement infrastructure, if we're talking about bikes and scooters, do you think that side of it's ready?
Well, no, it's not. And clearly, today's infrastructure in most countries is set up to, to a little bit faster than others, especially in Europe, where we're seeing, more, cycling and cycling pathways and roads put in, which can also be used for low power scooters, and that's great, and really applaud them for doing that. But there's things like ITS, intelligent traffic systems, that really have to be thought through, understood, and really made the most of. But I think perhaps the most important thing that we need to think about is to work and understand together with cities is, how do we use the land space that we have? How do we use the infrastructure correctly? So, for instance, what I mean by this, are scooters suitable for footpaths? I personally think they are not. But then what should footpaths be used for is the question. In some places where space is tight, then a small mail delivery vehicle or motorcycle might have to be parked on a footpath for 5 minutes. So what are those grey areas that really make up that? When you have a look over at roads, you think, cars, they kind of dominate that road space. Should pedestrians be allowed there? Well, probably not. Well, what about cycling? Yeah, probably, but it becomes dangerous. So how does that work in both a full autonomous environment and a partial autonomous environment, where sometimes, people who are riding a bike or scooters might get hit by people not paying attention, or they not paying attention? Then what about cycling lanes? What's the size of the vehicle that's too big? What's the size of the vehicle that's too slow? So I think really defining how we use our infrastructure that we have and how we use our space within cities very well to minimize accidents, to maximize transport efficiencies, I think is going to become an extremely important topic over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and also a massive investment as well for councils and authorities. I mean, you look at London just trying to set up Crosslink, the new railway line. It's costed them billions of pounds to do so. So to do that across all cities is going to cost a lot of money, and the regulations behind that as well will take a lot of working out.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. I think, but it's really important, for the sake of cities, that those conversations, happen, and that this is thought through well.
Yeah, brilliant. James, you're speaking at our TaaS Technology Conference on the 9th and 10th of July this year. We're really looking forward to seeing you there and discussing these topics further. Who are you looking forward to see and talk to and maybe connect with?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really interesting about this year is the nature of TaaS Technology, on one side being new mobility, AV, all that sort of thing. The other side being electric vehicle. And so on both sides, the people I'm really interested in seeing, particularly on the future mobility side, is some of my people that I know well at Travel Spirit. We're talking people like Saiho. We're talking people like Giles Bailey, Beate Kubitz, James Datson, who's also from Transport Systems Catapult, and James Gleed. These guys are really smart transportation people, and they're really focused on bringing out the best of what new mobility has to offer, make sure that data sets are open so that they benefit everyone. Making sure that the right time at the right place. And, they've been working in conjunction with MaaS Alliance out of Europe. So I think, those people are really people I want to, again, touch base with and spend some time talking with. One of the other is Malcolm. I'm not sure if he's a speaker, but he's certainly a part of the TaaS Technology board. He's very deep into future of batteries and the way that's moving forward. Kevin Leary, who's very focused on robotic charging and high power charging, which is becoming extremely important for things like trucks and buses who have to charge at 1, 2, 3 megawatts. And for him to discuss the solutions that facilitate that type of extraordinarily high power charging is going to be something that I'm certainly looking forward to seeing.
Yeah, I think the number of discussions...
And there's a bunch of others too.
Yeah, the number of discussions and topics and connections that are going to be made is going to be fantastic. It's going to be a 2-day conference, and it's going to be very exciting.
Just scratch the surface there, that's for sure.
Absolutely. James, thank you very much. James Carter, Vision Mobility. It's been great to have you on this first TaaS Talks too. I hope you have a good day, and I look forward to seeing you in July.
Thank you very much, and looking forward to being over the UK in July, for sure.
Thanks a lot.